Also want to thank everybody that's attending on YouTube. I'll introduce everyone, but at first, my name is Hamelback. I'm the CEO for the National HBPA. Also online, we have Dr. Doug Daniels, the president and chairman of the board for the National HBPA, practicing veterinarian, attending this morning from his practice in Virginia. So I think we all understand why we're here. We want to have a better grasp and answer a lot of questions regarding StrideSAFE. Obviously, I hope that you know StrideSAFE was a grant given through the KHRC. It's currently being utilized here and now at Ellis Park. But before I introduce everyone, I just want to make sure I go on the record to make a few things very clear. Regulations are not going to eliminate risk. It is very important that everyone outside of our industry understand that. Science is not going to eliminate risks in horse racing. We can't create regulations and just expect all those risks to go away. We don't want regulations to ultimately diminish horsemanship. Quite frankly, I think that's the road that we're on. But we're here to talk about science. I think science such as StrideSAFE, such as the lameness locator, such as the new fracture support system that the HBPA brought over from Ireland is important. Science is important. And we try to make sure we educate folks on what can we do better to help mitigate risks. Again, we cannot eliminate them, and we don't have enough people in our industry that are saying that. We don't have enough people that'll go on TV and make sure everyone understands that horse racing has inherent risks, and no matter what we do as horsemen, as veterinarians, as racetrack ownership groups, it's not going to go away. It's going to be a problem at some point. But what can we do as horsemen? What can racetrack ownerships do to help mitigate those risks? That's what we're talking about. We're not trying to talk about gotcha science. We're all in this world where things are happening that not all of us approve of. But the one thing that brings everybody in this room, it's the love of the horse. By God, I've been doing this since I was 14 years old in Louisiana Downs, and I make decisions today based off of what I think is going to be best for the horse. And if we do that, we're going to be in a better place. Not a PR, point your finger, who's at fault. We have to do what's best for the horse. So with that, we have a lot of questions today, and I really appreciate Dr. Lambert being here with StrideSAFE. Also, I think everyone knows Dr. Will Farmer here with Churchill. And everybody on the YouTube or Zoom, we appreciate you being here. If you do have a question on YouTube, please shoot that into Jenny Reese is here. She will be able to flag those and get them out. I will go through a lot of questions, so make sure that you're listening on YouTube because there may very well be a question you have that gets asked here. My goal, or I hope, by the time these two finish talking, a lot of these questions will be already answered. That would be great. But we will ask the questions, and by God, we'll stay here until all of them are answered. So again, I think we're going to start off with Will. Dr. Farmer is going to start off with his discussion on where we are with StrideSAFE.
Sure. Let me put the screen over here. A moment here for some tech. Everybody should see my screen should come up. That way you're not looking at a video of it. All right, well, thank you everybody for joining us. I'm really excited that you're here. And I just have the opportunity to kind of talk about how this study became and started to be developed. it was almost a year and a half ago, I think, David, that you and I started to have conversations about StrideSAFE and what the technology was, how it could be beneficial on multiple different levels of racing, whether that's racetrack ownership or it's a horseman side or a veterinarian side, that there were a lot of potential aspects that could be beneficial. And how could we incorporate this into some type of scientific study to help gain some validity to the protocols and processes that are behind it. So I'm going to let David talk about some of the additional history that came with StrideSAFE and where they've gone. But I'm going to talk specifically about our study and what we are doing. So those who are involved with ours, this is being led by Dr. Warwick Bailey out of Washington State University. He's the lead investigator, a very well-known equine surgeon and professor let's see if I can, yeah, I don't know why it's showing right there. It doesn't show on the one that's being broadcast for some reason. I apologize. But Dr. Bailey is the lead investigator on this. He has done a number of equine-related studies. Most recently, it's been in the press. We also partnered with him back in 2020 when we did a LASIK study as well. He was the lead investigator for that study. So he's got a lot of knowledge in the racing world in the United States. We also, as co-investigators, have Dr. Sue Stover, who is a very well-known orthopedic research professor out of the University of Southern California, out there. Dr. Scott Palmer, equine medical director for the New York Gaming Association. Dr. David Lambert, Dr. Denise McSween, who's a surgery resident at WSU, and myself. This was proposed last August, I think, to the Kentucky Equine Drug and Research Council as a potential study to be done, and it was fleshed out, reviewed by that committee. It was approved, and then ultimately, I believe in October, at the October Kentucky Horse Racing Commission meeting, was approved by the entire Racing Commission to fund this study. This is kind of a two-pronged study on what we're doing. The goal is to develop some protocols with a horse that does become identified with a red flag. And I'm going to let David talk about the science and on that side of it. But as a nutshell, horses that are identified as a red flag, how do we deal with that? There's been other studies that have been done where they have validated identifying the red flags, but this is the next step on how do we handle them? How do we communicate that information to trainers, to veterinarians, to be useful? Because the big bulk of this, we want to make sure that for the welfare of the horse, it's most helpful to be in trainers and veterinarians' hands. The second part was then to correlate high-speed works to racing. We think that they're probably pretty similar. We have a lot of anecdotal information that they are similar, but it hasn't scientifically been proven that if we use this in racing or in training, does it accurately represent what we expect to see in racing? So that's where that was the kind of the second part of this study. So I'm keeping my part very, very brief. That's very, very high level. I'm going to let David kind of talk about some of the specifics of StrideSAFE itself, and then we can kind of circle back if need be on any kind of questions that relate to me. So again, give me a second here. Have to switch screens. Up the next one. Have that. All right. Yeah, you're probably staying here so that way you can advance. Oh, it's not shared yet. 1 second. Let me share the screen. There. Gotta go in the presentation mode. I apologize. All right, that should show everybody the screen now.
Advancement.
And then-
With the buttons.
Yep, you can advance. Yep, but all you gotta do is, yep.
That one.
I'm just gonna put it on the table. That's okay.
Okay, great. First things first, thank you all very much for, you're not hearing? A bit better. You warned me. Very warmly, I took 3 minutes to do that. Thanks for coming. That's my first point. I'm extremely grateful to you all for taking time out of your busy schedules to come and listen to what we have to say today. I'm going to keep the scientific side of this on the brief side. Still can't hear me? Does that work?
No, it's just you.
Just me?
It's just you.
I'll try my best. Can you hear me better now? Is that better? Yeah. Oh, the fun right now. Is that better? All right, yeah. Good. Okay, so I'm not going to go into a whole lot of science today. This doesn't need to be a science lesson on the first go round. If there are scientific questions that you want to ask later on, then we can always flush them out at that time. But there's a far bigger picture here as far as I'm concerned. Not often you get to collect a number of trainers together to look at an attempt to solve a common problem. So I want to take the most advantage out of you all being here, getting feedback from you, and me being able to answer questions that we've experienced, in the early parts of this study. I'll go over just the basic elements of the science that's important. First of all, although this is relatively new, horses breaking down has created a lot of attention, over the last few years. It's a very old subject. We've known for 25 years that these horses that break down, when you look at the necropsies, when you look at the autopsies, there's always evidence there of some pre-existing pathology. And I've used that term, some of you may have heard it, these pre-existing conditions, and that's caused a bit of trouble. And I've got to apologize to a few of you from having used it. I've been a bit glib because that's the scientific literature. It's talked about pre-existing conditions, but I've only got to realize this go round that for you trainers, that could be an insult. That's like saying, hey, there was something wrong with my horse. No, there wasn't. My horse is all right. Quite reasonably, you've taken offense by that. So those of you that have felt that one, I'm sorry about that. There was no intent to be in any way negative about how the horse had been looked at or critical. But the term is still a right one, that there is evidence of pre-existing condition. The thing is, you can't find it. You can't see it, right? This is the nature of the whole problem. There's no heat, there's no swelling, there's no pain. It comes right past you. It comes right past your veterinarian. It comes right past the state veterinarian. It comes right past the jockey who's getting on the horse that day to ride him. And the first time you see something happening is when that leg breaks and that horse goes down. And then the pathologists get to see it. And lo and behold, down there by the origins of these cracks, these fractures, there's pre-existing disease there. That's the opportunity for us. The stuff has been there a long time. So the challenge to us is, how do we spot it? Now, way back when they started, when I talked to vets, they would say, look, if I only knew which horse to look at, if I only knew which leg, I've got the technology, I've got the right kinds of equipment, I could image this and I could find it. I just don't know which horse to do. I don't know which leg to do. We need a screen. We need somehow or other to point at the right animal. Well, at that time, when that started in 2018, 2019, I'd been working with sensors for, I don't know, 2005 was the first time I worked with them. It was for an entirely different reason. I was looking at how grade 1 horses moved and trying to manage grade 1 performances with using sensors. But while I've been doing that, I've seen cases where a horse would have one pattern, one style of going, and then all of a sudden it would change one day. And then lo and behold, 4 weeks later, 5 weeks later, something would happen. So I knew already that my sensors had the chance of being able to identify things weeks in advance of something happening. I'd not been able to work with that at that time. The world wasn't receptive for that information, back in 2010. But when these fractures happened, then I remembered all these cases and I said, right, we need to work on this. This could be the answer that the horsemen are looking for. Data from the horse itself when it's running at high speed. So at that point, we're getting people looking how long the whip is, we're looking at drug withdrawal times, we're looking at the nature of the track. And I'm thinking to myself, we'll get some of it from that. Some of those things were important, but until we get data from the horse's body when it's running fast, we're going to be missing a big part of the puzzle. So that was the kind of crusade I set off. I so enthusiastically believed that that was going to be the case that I started to do it. COVID comes along, and so we're all stuck at home. So we had 35,000 cases on hand that have been collected on races down in Tasmania. So while we're all sitting at home with nothing to do, myself, another vet and an engineer, we said, let's look back at this data and see if we can see, are there any patterns? So we spent that year and a half looking at all that data. And lo and behold, we got to recognize that, yes, indeed, there were patterns in these strides, and those patterns were there, oftentimes several weeks before the horse eventually broke down. And it didn't matter whether the horse finished last, in the middle, up near the front, winning. In any of those occasions, the horse could still show that flag that there was something going on there. The fact that we've got this thing happening for 25 years and this experience that we got is what gave me enthusiasm, to keep trying. So flash forward to where we are now. This is the sensor that we use. There's a number of you probably touched handle one of these. This is it. This is what goes in the saddle cloth. It fits in a little pocket. So this is one for training. We put it in the pocket on the outside. On your racehorse, it's going on in the jock room and then comes down to when the horse gets saddled, and it's sitting underneath the saddle cloth in the pocket in the back so that it's not immediately visible. So that sensor allows us to take data from the horse 800 times every second in 3 dimensions. So that means it's picking up movements side to side, that's mediolateral, up and down, that's dorsiventral, and front and back, that's longitudinal. So 800 times a second in each direction. So that's 2,400 data points every second that your horse is running or breezing. So this is a massive amount of brand new information that nobody has ever experienced before, that you guys have never had your hands on before. This is something all brand new that we've all got to work out between us. What on earth do we do with this? How do we handle these discoveries as they come on board? And that's a good part of what I hope this meeting is all about. We're going to discuss some of these things. We're going to discuss the findings. There's things we're doing wrong, I'm sure. There's things we're missing the point, I'm sure. There's things we can do better. I'm certainly sure about that. But it's you guys, I need the information back in order to work that out, because this is a trained solution to the fracture problem. I firmly believe the only way this problem is going to get solved is if we can give the trainers the right amount and the right kind of information and give it to them in time that they stand a chance of stopping the problem. Right now, you guys are on a beating to nothing, because there's no way you can see this. You're the focus of all this. The horse goes out and breaks down, and what happens? Another rule. 2 more vets have to look at it. Take a bit off the whips. Whatever the heck you have to do. You've all these rules, and the rules aren't going to really help you going forward. They might have made a change already. We've made some improvement in the fatalities, about 40%. But the 60% back, and the focus is on you guys and you're stuck. So what I'm saying to you is work with me, because I've got information that's coming off the horse 2,400 times a second, that if we can all learn what to do with it, you trainers and your vets, because we've got to get them involved as well, then we stand a chance of spotting these things and fixing them. And the good news is, if you spot them soon enough, the fix is easy. You just give them off for a while and the bones will heal on their own and the problem's gone. So this point that Eric was making, that, you know, I hope we don't lose horsemanship. Really what my sensor is doing is helping your horsemanship. This is 21st century horsemanship, right? The best horsemen have good hands, they have good eyes, they watch, they're attentive, they're sensitive, they feel their horses, right? That's what horsemanship is. And all I'm saying now is take that, by the way, take this as well. It's seeing things 2,400 times a second. You can only see them 20 times a second. This is going to help your horsemanship. And what you'll find when you work with it for a while, it feeds back around, because you'll find you'll get a flag one day and you'll say, what on earth's that all about? And you'll go and look extra carefully at that horse the next time he's galloping to see, can I see it? And what you're going to recognize is, yeah, his head's at a bit of a funny angle. His ears are back a little bit. He didn't quite finish like he should. He's a little bit more rattled when he comes off the track. A little bit more sweat, he's bouncing a bit. All stuff you've been seeing your whole lives, but now the lower levels of it, the thing is just file away and let him come back and carry on. Now it begins to mean something. Hello, I got a bit of a red flag here, and he's got his head funny and he doesn't look so happy, right? That's the first sign. Tell your vets, and then the vets have got the imaging equipment, and then they can go ahead and hopefully find one of these things that 2, 3, 4 weeks later was going to break a leg off in a race or a breeze and hurt somebody. So that's the kind of overall theory behind all of this. So that's the little sensor that we use. This is just to show you actually how easy the problem is, right? We all think this is a disaster problem. We've been trying and trying, they're throwing rules at you. Nobody knows which way to turn. How on earth are we going to fix this? It seems like it's impossible. It's not. It's really, really straightforward if you use the right tool. We've been using the wrong tools. Take data with the right tool off the horse, and this is what happens. So up on the top left, number A, that's what the data off the sensor looks like for one stride from a grade 1 winner. Grade 1 and grade 2, that's actually the average of about 32 grade 1 and grade 2 winners. So the blue line is that up and down. Remember, that's the dorsiventral. The green line is side to side, and the brown line is pushing forward and back. Don't worry about the details of it. I just want to get to the punchline. But you see that number A, the stride starts on the left when the first hind leg hits the ground. So that first 40% where all those lines are together, that's the back end hitting the ground and loading, because the back end is a big spring. And when that horse first puts his foot down and he's a grade 1 winner, the sensor stays very still. It doesn't go side to side. It doesn't go up and down. It just loads. So that's a grade 1 hind leg loading with the right spring. And then it lets loose and you got those wiggly bits. That's the front legs. That's when they catch the horse, because that's what they're doing. Push off the back, front legs catch. And then the last third of it, those little smooth slides, that's when he's up in the air. He's getting ready to go back down again. So that's a complete stride. Load the hind leg, smooth catch of the front legs, very little, if any, side to side, and an easy phase in the air. Number B is a sound $10,000 claimer. Essentially the same thing, smooth at the beginning, easy up and down when he catches himself on his front legs, and easy in the air. When you get into it, there's some subtle differences, but that doesn't matter. But look at that one at the bottom. Can anybody not see that? Right? Look how different that is. That's a grade 1 horse. He ran 4th that day in a grade 1. He'd won $600,000. Everybody passed it. Right? The trainer entered him quite confident that the horse was going to do good. He went off, I think, 2nd and 3rd favorite. The vets in the morning are all over him. This is a grade 1 race. He can't break down. We can't have the television on this one. So you know they went over him, right from top to bottom, right? And the jockey rode into post. He doesn't want to go down. He didn't feel it. But every one of you, look how bad that is. That sensor is screaming that this horse is in trouble. Now, luckily he got round, but a week later he comes back out and goes back into training, and that leg comes off in the morning, and he had to be euthanized. So the point here is it's easy, right? It's not difficult to see this thing. It's difficult with your eyes and your hands, but use the right tool, and it's a lot more straightforward. Right? Now, when it actually gets into it in real time, it's not quite as simple as that, as you can imagine. There's all kinds of noise, things can happen, jockeys can jump up and down, the horse can get hit, he gets sand in his face. There's all kinds of things can get in the way and throw us a wonky signal. We're just going to have to live with that. There's no way out of that. But as horsemen, we can dig into it and we can look and make a sensible decision. Yeah, that jockey was dancing all over, he got a bad bump. I can be a little bit less critical this time. Maybe I'll put the sensor on when he breezes and just make sure he's all right. But I think that was a false red. That's going to happen. That happens all the time. And that's part of what we're doing in this new study that we're doing, trying to work out what those false negatives are. And we need that information from you guys. You know, every time you've got a way of interpreting this or you see something happen, please tell us, because that can go down then in the instruction manual when we put it out to everybody in the end, that when you're looking at a red, this is what you need to do. This is where the false reds are. This is where the dangerous reds are. We've got to work it out. But at the end of the day, again, it's trainer information. This is your information. This is for you to do your job better with your vet. It's just for you. It's not for the whole world, isn't this? This is helping you guys solve your problem. So let me show you another case. Here again, this is the same horse, the one on the top. That's the first 10 strides out of the gate for, I think it was a 2-year-old. Yeah. And that one at the top, that's relatively normal. 10 strides, off he goes. And he got a green flag that day. Then the horse goes off somewhere else. He ran once, he breezed twice, and he came back and he ran again. And we got him the next time. Look at this. Can anybody not see that horse is in trouble? Look how different they are. Those great big peaks, those are huge G-forces that this horse is feeling. Right out of the gate, this horse was in trouble. Now, this one went like that for 70 seconds. 70 seconds. And then about 100 yards before the finish, bang, the cannon fractured, off goes the jockey and down goes the horse. It was breaking down for 70 seconds in that race. They don't step in a hole. That idea about horses stepping in a hole, it's all we could conclude. The horse was fine, the horse is sound, he looks good, he's down. He must have stood in a hole, right? It's a natural thing to be able to put those points together and conclude that that's what's going on. But we've done thousands of horses now, and we've done 50 or so that have died. We have not yet seen one step in a hole. I think there's bound to be a bad step now and again. I'm not saying it will never happen, but I'm saying as a general point of view, guys, it's not stepping in a hole. As a general point of view, it's doing this for weeks, sometimes months, before the leg eventually goes. So there's our opportunity. This is what it looks like, and we can see these things weeks before it happens. We can tell you, and with a bit of luck, sometimes we can tell you perhaps which leg it's going to be on. Dr. McSweeney here, she's a surgery resident at WSU. She's on another grant working with us, and she's trying to identify from the signal which quadrant it's in. And I'm sure there's a few of you who have worked with her already, and you've seen how uncannily accurate it can be. She'll come to you and say, it's getting off the right front, lo and behold, horse has a problem on his leg. We had another one that we came to, the guy had claimed it, and it was a red flag, and he said, I know what this is. The shoes are too small. And so he took the small shoes off, he put bigger shoes on, Dr. McSweeney breezed it, bang, red flag gone. The horse was a green flag and he was okay. It was his feet caused the red flag in that case. So there's all this is going to come out, but it's going to take work and it's going to take time. It's going to take commitment. We all have to be on it together. We're not fighting one another. We're together trying to solve the problem with the best information we can. So you can see that one. That's what happened to that horse. He lasted 70 seconds. They'll usually last 15 seconds or so. That's about average. But we've seen them all the way along. Now, sometimes there'll be a green flag and down they'll go. They will do that. There are some conditions that make that happen. Things like, for example, a ligament. If the ligament gives way, it can be going on a ligament that's weak and it won't give you any sign until it finally gives. Like any of you who watch soccer have seen that right in front of your eyes. There'll be somebody running along flat out, chasing after the ball, and all of a sudden, pop, pop, pop on his leg, on his left leg, and he's grabbing his hamstring muscles. Right? He didn't know anything was going to happen. And he's got the best of physios, the best of care. He's worth millions and millions of dollars. Right? So he got every chance he could, and bang, he didn't feel it coming. We're going to get them. And like Eric was saying, we're not going to get them all. We have to face the reality that in any kind of athletic endeavor, there's going to be these kinds of events. So we must get tied on for that. And don't let's beat the whole idea to death just because one horse does that kind of thing. We just have to record that it does it. We have to know how often it's going to happen. We have to all together understand that that's part of our game. And on we go and we try and learn ways to find that particular problem. But then that's another day's work. So when we've looked at those things, when I started off, I tried to make a simple way of reporting. In those days, I was really trying to shake everybody up to have a crack at this. So I made this traffic light idea up because I wanted a visceral response. You see a red light and you see a traffic light, it's, wow, panic, it's got a red light. And I wanted that because everybody was dozing off and nobody was watching and they weren't taking any interest. So I did it on purpose. But I think it might have overshot the mark now, because now it's getting more universal. A red flag might be a problem for you guys. It's too much of a visceral reaction. A red flag, oh, that's too bad. And I might have worded that wrong, and I might need to change it now because people are getting on board now. And now the effect I wanted it to have, a visceral reaction, is actually happening, but it's happening maybe with the owners if they get the red flag. So whoa, we have to tone that down a bit. So I'd like ideas from you guys of what should I call this? Is there another name I can come up with down the road to make it fit more with your daily life and the daily way in which you train your horses and interact with your owners? There's a word there. It might be that, it might come that's commonplace and it mellows down, but I'm more than happy to change it if that's what you want. Now I'm jumping to the finish, right? I'm skipping through all the science. Ask me if you want, later on. But this is the results of the red flags. This is a study of 6,616 horses, and it shows what the chances are of a horse dying or having a fatal or a career-ending injury. Right? Over on the right are the green flags. If you make a green flag, a risk of 1, because the greens, they can happen. You can have cardiac events, you can have all kinds of things. So if green is 1, the amber light is 6. It's 6 times more likely than a green to suffer a career-ending injury. The soft red, the low-risk reds are 23, the medium reds, 47, and look at the dark reds, the high risk, 300. So if you get a horse that's got a red flag, he is 300 times more likely to have a fatal and a career-ending injury than is a green. Now, that doesn't mean to say they're all going to do that. They're not. A lot of them are negatives. It could be a jockey effect. It could be all kinds of things. We have to work out what kind of things can it be. How do we mellow this? How do we put this in the right perspective? Because we need to keep that understood properly from a trainer's point of view, from a horseman's point of view. We've got to get sensible. This is a red flag, it's 300 chances. That can get out of hand, right? Because I've made it a bit extreme just to catch everybody's attention. But now we've caught it, we might need to tone it down a bit. But please accept that these red flags can be perfectly okay. But if they have a red flag, they have fallen in that group where they're 300 times more likely to have a fatal injury. So all I would ask at this point is be aware of that, take special care, pass it on to your vets, make sure they can look at the horse in the right way, right? Because, yeah.
A quick question now.
Yeah.
So out of the 6,600, was it the 370 horses? Those are the only ones that tested red, or are there another 100 that tested red that weren't cash?
Well, that's it. This is more complicated than that. This is of those that in that 6,600, there were 17, I think 17% would have been any of those reds or random. The ones that hit the top red was 5.5%. Right,
So I understand that we tested red.
yeah, 5%. So for you, for a trainer, that's about 1 in 20 times one of these is going to come back with that on. Now, that might seem like a lot, might seem a lot of work and a little bit of a pain, but that's the reality of it. That's the world we live in. That's where our athletes work. That's where they run, right? They're in this particular, those are real statistics. 1 of 20 of them gets into this high risk. We better be careful. But it's only 1 in 20 now. So if you've got 100 horses that you've looked at after over a period of time, you need to concentrate particularly on 20 of them. You don't need to concentrate on 100. Those green ones, 75% of the greens, they're okay. You just have to do your routine stuff on them, watch them cool out, feel their legs over the next few days, make sure they're eating, talk to your riders, all the normal stuff. But he's a green. Chances are you're okay with him. That fella there, he's got 300 times more chance of eventually breaking down. So we better be careful with him. Now, this is where the vets come in, because this isn't your job now. This is a veterinary job, right? Because there are a limited number of places where these fractures happen. In the front legs, you've got the fetlocks, you've got the humerus can go, you've got neck of the scapula can go. On the back end, you can have the fetlocks again. You can sometimes have things in the hops. You can have the tibia go, the top of the femur can go, the pelvis can go, and the dorsal spines of the vertebrae can go. That's the list that your vet has got in his head. And if he goes round all those spots, and those spots all check clear, there's a very, 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 very slim chance that that horse is going to break, because that's where all the breaks come from. So if he can check the box for those, then he could still be on sound, he could still have a problem, there's something could be going on, but he's not falling in that category that have pre-existing pathology in the areas that are known to fracture. He's not one of them. So at that point, you guys have then got the problem cornered. You've saved 1 or 2, and you've rescued 1 or 2. And before you know where you are, instead of 1 in 1,000 that's having this problem, you've got 1 in 5 and then 1 in 10,000. And then it's an event that happens once or twice in Kentucky in a year. And then it's one of these random ones, like Eric was saying. Some of them are going to do that. But that's kind of where we're headed. If we can give you the information, and if your vets can work these things up. And that's what Dr. McSween is doing. She's a surgeon, so we're learning all the different ways that the vets should approach this. And then somehow or other, we're going to have to teach all the vets how to read them squiggly lines and to talk to you about what's going on. That's not your job. Right? You've got enough to do, but your vets are going to have to know how to do this. And they've got no chance. This is new to them as well. So we're going to have to teach them. And Dr. Bailey, who's headed up the project that we're doing now from WSU, that's what he does. Right? He's a teacher. He's one of the best teachers on equine exercise in the whole world. And he has agreed to help us put teaching sessions, wet labs, together for vets. And the good vets who are enthusiastic, they'll show up and they'll learn all this stuff. And the vets who are lazy won't. And then you can choose which vet you're going to use. And the world goes on. The people who do it right save the horses and survive, and the people who don't will probably complain and bellyache at me and call me all kinds of names. But sooner or later, the bad apples are going to get weeded out, because this will weed out the people who are not thorough and don't do their job properly. But we will go ahead and train all the vets on how to do this.
Doc, how much more time do you have on slides?
2 or 3 minutes.
Okay.
Is that all right?
That's,
I
should
want to
be.
pull this one quick. This has been a struggle because there's nobody supported any of this. I want to just make a mention of Mattress Mac, right? He stood up where nobody else in the country would, and he's helped me pay some of these tests. All the horses done at Rillato, he paid for that. Some of the horses in New York, he paid for that under the name of his Run Happy Wellness. So if ever you see Mattress Mac wandering around, thank you. Thank you. There's nobody else has done it. No racetracks, no associations, no this, that, and the other. None of the big names. They all knew. Nobody helped, but that man did. Right. So I think we need to give him a special thanks when we see him. We also have to thank this group, Washington State University, for putting themselves out and supporting us. Kentucky Racing Commission, they stood up. Of all the racing commissions in the country, the Kentucky Racing Commission, they stood up, and through the KDRC, they put the money together. They worked with Dr. Howard, worked with Dr. Bailey and Dr. Farmer, and they worked this thing through the system, and we got the money, and here we are working out for you guys, what can we do with the red flags? That's what we're here for. We're here for you guys, because you are the people who are going to be able to save these horses. You. So that's basically all I have. I want to leave that, as I answer questions, I want to leave that up, to keep that in your head. 300 times greater risk. Right? Good, thanks.
Stop screen sharing.
You stop.
Okay, thank you very, very much, Dr. Farmer, Dr. Lambert, for going through that. I'm going to guess that a lot of the questions that we have are not going to be rooted in science. Because I know we want to stay away from the science and the research and the data until it's peer reviewed, it's just measured. So now I know, at least for me, and I'm not going to speak for everybody, but horsemen would have liked to have had this done in April, right? So we would have liked to have had this information before now, but now is when we've got it, and now is how we need to move forward. I want to stress this again. I said a little bit in the opening, and I know Dr. Lambert stressed it. This is a tool. There are tools that will help us go forward. And I think if used properly, this, along with other research, can be beneficial in what we're trying to achieve, and that is, again, to protect the horse. I do want to get on one soapbox because I don't usually take, I don't usually thwart an opportunity to get on a soapbox. The pre-existing conditions term does bother me quite a bit. I think that when you use a percentage, recently and historically, 85% of the musculoskeletal injuries have a pre-existing injury. Nobody seems to want to define pre-existing injury. And of course, I've been hammered quite a bit because I said, I think pre-existing injuries could start at the farm, right? But what is a pre-existing injury needs to be a little bit better documented going forward, in my opinion. Because again, Dr. Lambert explained it well. If you caught on, it is an undetectable issue. So what is a remodeling dysfunction? Can we see it? Can we find it? Did it come from a chip being taken out as a weanling? Now, where does that start? So when you look at pre-existing injuries, I think there needs to be a better clarification, because I'm going to throw out an anecdotal percentage. 85% of the horses that walk back to the barn probably had a pre-existing injury. That's what professional horses in racing have. I have 2 fake knees, right? I have pre-existing injuries. Doesn't stop me from exercising. So that's a term that I hope the veterinary community, at least from the research side, will really take a look at. Again, we're trying to mitigate the risk. We're trying to use a tool, but it's not going to catch everything. Again, reiterate what Dr. Lambert said. It's not going to catch everything. We can vaccinate for West Nile. Some horses are still going to get West Nile, but it's a tool, right? And that's what we hope can help horsemen going forward. I do think that the semantics around the red light, green light, yellow light, maybe that can be changed. Again, all of that is something going forward, but getting the data is important. So I'm going to start off with the questions. I've got quite a list. So again, I would expect that many questions out there will get pointed here with some of these. Thanks to Sarah and Jean for getting these all put together. So again, most of these questions are not going to be rooted in science. Just want to reiterate that. So what assurances can be given to horsemen that the data collected for the study is not going to the caged RC or the state vet or to the new favorite word, this?
So I'll take a stab at that. So while this study is funded by the KHRC, this is with a third party entity. So this is going to the Washington State. There is very strict confines about how this data is to be used and what it's to be used for. And that is at the works of Washington State University and Warwick Bailey in his direction. There are several of us that are involved. Probably a question that's coming up is, obviously I'm a co-investigator in the study, but I don't see any of the information. I don't look at any of the information because I'm trying to keep myself one step removed, just so that guys aren't concerned that we're trying to play big brother or trying to overlook anything. This is a research study, and we want the information and the data to be as valid as possible. And so while I'm hoping, that's more of the fact that we are helping with the logistics here at Churchill Downs of making sure sensors get on. We've got somebody in the jobs room who's in charge of doing that, who's doing the GMAX system as well. So that information goes to WSU to be used, and that is important when it comes down to validity of the scientific study. That has to be peer reviewed. The goal is to have a peer-reviewed paper or papers that will come from this. And that there are very strict guidelines in the scientific publication world with how that information is handled and how it gets distributed prior to being public release when it comes out in a paper, which at that point, everything is anonymized. So it's not this horse, it's horse 1 or horse 5 or horse 10. It's not horse names and it's not trainers names. Everything is purely randomized when it comes to kind of any identification if a specific case is discussed.
One other thing too, because this has been a problem, or this has been a question throughout. So my answer to you, we're treating this as vet-to-vet information outside of the study. Like, as I'm a vet, a co-worker of mine is a vet, it's coming to you, trainers, as if we were vets, and it's going to your vets. So it gets handled as if it was an X-ray or an ultrasound examination or something like that. That's the framework. Generally, we've got it in for now, because you've got a known and accepted way of dealing with that kind of confidential information. So that's where it resides when it's outside of the restrictions of a research program. But again, over time, that's going to evolve. You guys are going to have some input on all of that, but that's where it sits for now. It's veterinary medical information when it's not in the study.
So then how are the connections actually contacted if they get, let's leave the term red flag right now?
Okay, so for right now within the study, Dr. McSweeney has been following up, trying to get to people. In the ideal world, my goal would be that we've got an email or an email contact with every trainer. So the moment we get a report, it's being to you. So if we go forward into the application mode outside of the research mode, that would be my starting suggestion. Let us have your emails, and the moment we get a report, green, amber, red, or whatever, we beam that off to you for you to use with your veterinarian as you see fit. That's where I would hope it would go. And then you can show it to your vets if you want to, or you could instruct us, send it to the vets every time. But until you tell us where it needs to go, it's only to you that it goes.
Thank you. So the next question I'm going to basically answer based off of your two answers. Someone asked, will this be used in helping void a claim, or will it be given to someone to have an advantage in claiming a horse. I think we just heard that the answer right now is no. That information doesn't go anywhere right now. I'm going to say University of Washington just to kind of pinpoint. That's where the information goes. So right now, nobody's getting this information and saying, you know, I can or I can't claim this horse, or even to the extent of void claiming a horse. That information is not being given to anyone to void the claim. So those are very specific questions that I think that hit them all. Yeah, absolutely.
I was gonna put just to reiterate that. So these reports right now, because of the way the technology is set, these reports aren't even actually run until after race day is over with. So just to dispel any rumors that these reports actually aren't even done until after racing that day. So.
And then here's another point I'd throw in. What do you want it to do? Do you want it to avoid, having to send a claim back to it? Is that what you don't like? I mean, I think as a training community, here we are, the book's open. We're just there to go with this. And that's the golden opportunity. We haven't got a load of high schools telling you how to apply it. You've got it out there, you can study it, you can look at it, make your own rules, police yourselves, put together what you want. So if and when ICER ever get interested, well, you've got the rule book already, and it's not going to change because you're doing a good job to start with. So they don't need to come and breathe down your neck. You've got the playbook's open, and you've got time for a while. So I would say, think about it all the time. What do you want, guys?
And that just very well answered the next question was, is this involved? The answer right now is no. Do they want to be involved? That was the follow-up question. Who knows? But right now, this is not involved with this. So this is a research project trying to develop a good tool. This one I'll give to Dr. Lambert. I feel like I know the answer to this question, but does SAFE Stride pinpoint where a suspected area of pre-existing injury is? My answer would be no, because at the end of the day, right now, that information comes after the fact, the appropriate programming.
Yeah, it's not a diagnostic tool. That's not what it's set up for. It's a screen. But at the same time, we're learning all the time. And Dr. McSweeney has a grant that she's trying to identify the quadrants, right? Because we feel that for you guys, it'd be really helpful, as well as getting a flag, you knew which leg to look at. It's got a flag and we think it's getting off the right onto the left. We think it's a problem in the hind end. So eventually we're going to get to the point where we'll give you some general help in where to look. But this isn't going to be a diagnostic tool. It's a screening tool. And I think if we put the quadrant on it, it'll be extra valuable to you all.
This is a great question for Will to follow up. That is, are the PET scans free with the study? So if the trainer's given notice that they have this red flag, will the PET scan be free?
So we've done a number already, and there was funds built into the study for advanced diagnostics, whether that's PET scan that we have here at Churchill Downs, or that's nuclear scintigraphy or standing MR, whatever the veterinarian felt was appropriate. Those funds were not limited to PET only. They were limited to advanced diagnostics. So if the issue looks like it's in the fetlock and the PET scan was appropriate, by all means, that was covered. We've done a number. Denise, do you know about how many we've done?
Just had 3 go through the PET scan and 1 go through the piercing.
Great. So that kind of follows up with this, which again, I think part of this question may be able to be answered, but the other part can't. What percentage of the horses that were flagged subsequently had a PET scan? So right now we're saying 3
and 1 month.
3 and 1 for bone scan. And then the second part of the question, whomever submitted and said, what are the results? That is what we can't answer. That's part of the research right now. That again is confidential information. But right now, if you've gotten a red flag, it sounds like at least 4 horses have had follow.
And can I check, that's just the imaging. There has been follow-up from insurance, radiographs.
Well, yeah, the question was PET scan in particular. So, if we get the PET scan after getting flagged, what are the confidentiality and privacy securities that only the horse's connections are given the results?
So I'll speak to that. So the way we have unrelated, this is totally unrelated to the strike safe portion, but just the way in general how the PET scan works here at Churchill Downs is it's staffed by Haggard Equine Medical Institute. They are the ones who staff it, schedule it, do everything. We simply house it. So that information is, they are basically, this functions as a diagnostic facility. So if the veterinarian feels that that's the appropriate diagnostic, they schedule it. Horse comes here, they're here for, call it the day, the horse is, and then that, those results are being read by a board certified radiologist, then that report is sent to the veterinarian who made the request. So I'm totally out of the loop, state's totally out of the loop. That is a private transaction between Haggard and the referring veterinarian.
Right now, I think most of this question is a little premature. What is the ultimate cost going to be for this service? Right now, I would say we don't know. Correct.
Well, no, right now it's costing us about $35 a horse to do the race day analysis.
And again, I think this was geared more towards what's it going to cost the individual. But right now, this is being funded by the EDRC through the Kentucky Racing Commission. So one good part of this question that I don't know the answer to, whom are you flagging? Are you just flagging reds, or is it reds and yellows, given the opportunity to follow up?
The grant, when we put the application in for the grant, we knew that funds were limited. So we had to define a group of reds that we would run through the process. So it was the most high risk ones are the main ones to be flagged. But once we've got them, we just feel obligated to let you guys know. So wherever we can, we're letting you know about just the red flags that come out. The grant calls for just the high risk reds, but personally, individually, we feel we'd like to help and contribute more. So we're giving you whatever we can whenever we can.
Great. So this question is one that I had, but a little bit back onto my soapbox. So the press release, which again, we can debate that press release, but at the end of the day, I know it caused some rub, but it mentioned that 7 of the 8 musculoskeletal fatalities showed abnormal readings out of the gate. As a quote. Their question, but also would be my question is, again, how many horses went back to the barn just fine, also had those types of bleedings? Because again, this pinpoints back to, we're going to collect the research, but understand it doesn't catch everything, and understand that some of the things it catches may not actually be a real problem.
All right, a few things on that. First of all, apologies. In no way did I ever imagine that press release was going to cause people distress and anxiety. I was trying to stay away from our research project because I'm not allowed to talk about that. And I wanted to throw some optimism out there by saying that, using this pre-existing condition term again, saying that the literature says it's there, and lo and behold, we found it before the race really got going. There's the ray of hope. We know it's there, and lo and behold, we found it. Or if we could just back that test up, a breeze or a race, we're going to stop these things. So I was trying to say to you guys, yeah, hang in there. We've got this problem just about solved, and we're proving it as we go along. That's what I intended to do, and it just backfired something awful. So I'm very sorry that caused distress anyway. That was my only intent. The question from Eric about the pre-existing thing being defined more, that's very well defined in the literature. It's clear what all the pre-existing conditions are that we're talking about. And just in a nutshell, when any bone is put under stress, the way it absorbs that stress is it kind of, let's say, crunches in it. They get these little micro fractures in the crystalline nature of the bone. And then what the body does, it sends new cells in that dissolve that crushed out stuff out of the way and puts new bone in. And when it puts it in, it puts it right along the little micro fissure line. So that's like rebar. Because it knows where the stress was, because that's where the little line is, it fills it all up. So it makes the bone even stronger than it was before, and it makes it strong in the right direction. It's put rebar in the bone. So what happens when there's something goes wrong is it dissolves out the old stuff, but it doesn't put the new stuff in quick enough. So that little crack stays there as a weak spot. And then it does it again, and another little weak spot, and another little weak spot. So there's all these little weak spots going on, slowly accumulating through the horse's life. The first time that happens, no big deal, it's just there. But sooner or later, it reaches a point where it creates instability, and one step after that is all the little fractures coalesce and come together, and the bone breaks. So that process is really, really well established. When you look at it on necropsy, you can see the body's attempt to try and heal it. There's all kinds of little bits of bone. It's like a splint. You can look, for example, at the inside of the pelvis. If you saw the inside of a pelvis that cracked, it's like it's got splint bones popped up all over as the body was trying its best to hold that thing together. Well, of course, they all get to the point where they hurt a little bit, and so bang, they'll show up on our senses. So the process is very clear, it's very well documented, it's been peer reviewed for 25 years, and that's what we made. But we may have to modify our terminology to make it more relevant to the day-to-day, life of the trade.
Right. I mean, I would go so far as to say that when you're looking at 2-year-olds, again, we get damned quite a bit for running 2-year-olds, right? But these pre-existing injuries are actually what is causing the strength of a 2-year-old to be stronger and last longer as a horse. So to me, that's kind of a pre-existing injury, but that's a positive thing. So that's why I feel pretty confident I'm going to attack the semantics around that and do the best I can, because again, what's causing it is one thing, but just saying a horse has a pre-existing injury isn't necessarily defining what I think is good for the rest of the public. This question.
There's a couple of.
Oh, sorry.
I think this is where I have the issue. Eric's question. I think most vets and most trainers say the same thing. So when we hear pre-existing condition, there are horses in all the barns or even other practices where they have quote unquote, if they x-ray something, there's no way this horse is sudden. Horse is 100% sound, it doesn't get red flag on your system, it has vet checks. And so there are what I would say would be pre-existing conditions that the horse races for multiple years. And so I think that's where they're scared and nervous that the racing commissions or the regulatory agencies or the execs, racing tracks, or even the public or HISA are going to take either this technology or any technology that it's omniscient and it should know all. And then if we can do something where a red flag comes up, then it's on us. And that's, I think, where we're worried about what he's saying is that term pre-existing condition or pre-existing injury. He's saying is how many horses out there that have those already that aren't red flag that can race soundly that we're not catching. And the one reason we're catching the one we're catching is what we do right now. That's what we're trying to figure out how to navigate this.
Isn't this great? I mean, what an easy solution, right? We're not having to deal with something that takes 4 years to do. We hear you. We want to just do exactly what it is you all want. You know the biology, you know the nature of it, you know your job, and you know what you need. What's the right words? How do we find the right words for this time? It'll happen tomorrow. So we can fix this really.
The cool problem with that is there are no right words for the anti-racing groups or those that don't understand the information that we're given, or the people that don't do animal rights activists. There's no right word in my mistake. And this is going to be a prime example of when Churchill had a meeting about taking away the trade bonuses and paying 62 last. 99, I would say at least 99% of the public, even owners that own resources, never knew that was happening. But their thought was, we're going to address this. It makes it look like they're going to do something that's, because if somebody's running a horse just to finish last and get $500, well, it could cost more to run than that. And so we're actually losing money, or the owners losing money. The public didn't know that. And so when they hear that, they say, well, what does Churchill think is going to happen if you pay down the last? And the person is getting $200 to run a horse. Their natural reaction, well, of course, you're going to run a horse just to make money. It just needs a little bit of education and communication. That would never occur. But when that came out, when the fire show came out on social media saying, oh, this week, of course it's bad. And that's where I think you need to be careful on, like you said, terminology, red light is what happens if some horse, breaks down 6 months from now, had a red light 3 months ago. You're gonna say, well, you should have been warned, 8 months ago that this was red flag, well, it's been a green flag for since then. But that information is still out there possibly, and that's where it concerns liability, or concerns, one of the image of a trainer, or get 60 days and $25,000 fine because it didn't eat. That's, I think, where we need to tread lightly on.
So I think on a couple of the parts of that with regards to the pre-existing issues, if you read the scientific book, and I get, granted, there's a disconnect between what the public takes it and what is said. Pre-existing conditions, especially if you look at any of Sue Stover's word, there are very specific lesions that are associated with a majority of these injuries that happen. So the pre-existing isn't arthritic changes, or he's an old campaigner, he's got a chip somewhere. There are very defined specific lesions that start these fractures, especially like a condylar fracture. There's very defined lesions. There's scientific sides of things that are very specific that the public doesn't necessarily understand when we talk about a pod lesion, what that means for the risk of a certain specific type of fracture. So I get that the term gets thrown around very loosely, but I think in the scientific world, it's very focused.
I agree with that. I'm saying, so if we get cost in the line of fire, with the public misunderstands it. That's why I think a lot of us are apprehensive about where this goes in regards.
And so I think the second part of it, which is not part of this study, we do not know this information yet, but we can take the EID, the Equine Injury Database that Tim Parker runs for Jockey Club. We know that as horses who have been placed on vet's list, for whatever reason, there's a risk associated with that doesn't really ever go away. And I think we're going to find that there probably is some of that is the same. But if you run a horse that was on the vet's list 3 weeks ago, I don't see this being treated really any different than that, because especially if you document or you do your homework, hey, here's a red flag. You had the vet do an exam, you've done whatever, need the appropriate treatment, or maybe there is no treatment. There was some other issue that was dealt with. That has been done. I personally don't see it as being any different than like a vet type situation down the road when it comes to holding the trainer accountable 3 months down.
And that's another question I had, because you talked about, somebody asked a question about voiding claims. Well, we've already seen horses that get voided that were green. We see horses that get passed that were red flag.
That's not part of this study. So
Yeah,
information is not being shared.
In real life, in real time, we've seen that.
Yeah.
So those things are going to be questions that you're dealing with. So like you said, when a horse gets red flag, it needs to prove the claim. Now, we're concerned that we have a red flag horse happen. Or if horses should have gotten voided and they didn't, and they're red flag.
Well,
There's a big divide in what information you can.
hang on one second.
Right
Let me inject there, because I think Tom and I are connecting on false positives. Comes back to false positives.
Horse house stadiums.
Well, yeah, but the way I was going to suggest it is, you did put out in the print that 7 of the 8 had red flags, essentially. But do we know that every other horse had a green light that came back home? So I mean, that's the kind of information that we feel needs to be cautious and guided so it doesn't get misused. So did every other horse come back with a green?
So I guess this addresses the responsibility and the functionality of the screen. Right, a screen is trying to find the smallest number of hands that contains the at-risk horses. That's where we're focused. So what the ones that get a red that don't have or don't suffer an injury, what happens to them? It doesn't take away from the fact that the ones that have got the red flag are in that high risk group. Now, down the road, and we're doing it even as we speak, we look at all these big populations, and our goal is to send you the probabilities of outcome with every flag So we're going to put it into terms of what's the likelihood of the length of career of this horse? Is he looking at a rest? Does the data say he's going to need a rest? Does the data say he's going to go missing after 3 races? That data is all going to be there, and it's going to be really useful to you guys as management data while you work out quite what to do. So early days yet, right? That's where we're headed. But I can make one assurance to you as we go forward that what we'll do, how we'll operate. Philosophical question, right? You can write it down. We're going to do the right thing. So regardless of what the world says, regardless of what the animal rights people say, I can't control them. I can't react to them. I can only do what's on our desk. And our desk is to do the right thing. And that's to make our science as correct as we can be. It's to make us as open as possible to comment and to criticism. It's to listen to all you guys for what you want. And if we stick to that basic principle, we won't go wrong. There'll be ups and downs, there'll be fights and yelling and screaming, and we'll get thrown out of the barn now and again. But down the road, we're going to get it right if we do that. So if we're tolerant, if we listen, if we do the right thing, here is the potential for the situation in a few years to be a lot better than it is now. Now, if there's an image thing, you've got a man who's perfectly placed to be the voice to the general public, understanding and making the bridge between what we're doing on our desk, what you're doing in your barns, and what the public are understanding. That's a whole other day's work. So I must make sure that I don't create trouble for this man, which I've obviously done without any intention at all. I must make no trouble. I must do the right thing, and then he has the chance of educating the world. Hang on a second.
We talk more about like track conditions. How that factors into your concern what you're doing.
Yeah.
Say you got that the action course you race on and eat for service.
Yeah.
Like
yeah. There's 2 things into that. Thank you. That takes me back to a point that was made earlier about red flags and green flags. Realize too, and I'll get round to this, realize too that the red flag is a model that's built on animals that are showing the signs that they're going to break down. It's not built on a model based upon whether they're just generally sound or not. Right? It's not a soundness model. It's a possibility of breaking down model. So let's say you've got a horse with, ankylosed fetlocks or something, and he runs all the time with 6, he's been running forever. Right, you know that in a purist sense, he's not sound, and he might come out of the race, jarred up a little bit, and he might be completely green, right? Because he's not doing the thing that this one that you think is perfectly sound is going to break a cannon off. So we've got to be careful of that too.
that's why you the red state is which false positive.
Yeah, it's what's the model trying to do. So in that comes round to your question then. That the model is not intended to reflect the differences in surfaces. If that was there, we'd just have too many reds altogether. So when we did it, we built that in. So the flags are not surface sensitive. Now the signal is surface sensitive, right? So if we look at the individual stride of an animal, then you can see very clearly whether it does or it doesn't like the surface. You'd see that most remarkably in grass horses. So if you've got a grass horse runs on the dirt, he'll have a horrible signal. It'll be all over the place. Put him on the grass that suits the way he bounces on. It'll go beautiful as you like. It can be day and night, but they're still both green, right? So the similarities, imagine I use this analogy. You've got a car, it's got a sensor on the wheel to tell when the tire goes flat. It's a vibration sensor, it's how it does it. You drive down the blacktop, no light comes on. You drive down the beach, no light. You drive across the road, across the field, no light comes on. It's bouncing all over, it's doing all kinds of stuff, no light comes on. But the moment it loses 2 pounds of pressure, the light comes on. Doesn't matter what you're on, but it comes on because it's no longer sound tires, it's now a flat tire. And the model with those sensors is to pick it out when it's flat and not worry about the day-to-day stuff. So we had to follow that idea with what we did. Otherwise, we'd have cluttered you up with all kinds of stuff. So all that thing that can affect the way the data comes out. We put in a big pile and kept it outside of the model so that we could make the reds, even more tight. But even then we missed them, right? So you can't build something in for a jockey taking the ball and getting hit by somebody about. There's no way you can build that into an automated system, because we've got to make it automated to keep it cheap. Because if there's an expert looking over every one of these things, it cost a fortune and you couldn't do it. So the moment you automate, you're going to get some questions on the fringes. You can't avoid that. Now, as time goes by, and we get more data and we put artificial intelligence in it, it'll get tighter and tighter. But for right now, we're dumping it on you guys. Saying, look, you got a red, but these are some of the examples. It could be the jockey, watch out. It could be mud in his face, watch out. But you're still only looking at the 5 out of 100 that have got a problem. You're not having to look at all of them. And having to work this out is the price that we're going to have to pay right now to solve this problem. With no other way of doing it. This is rolling our sleeves up and addressing the problem right now and being optimistic that it's just going to get better. This is the worst day of your life today. Tomorrow's a better day if we all work together. And as the years go by, it's going to be really slick.
But one comment.
Yeah.
So we cannot solve this problem, no way, shape, or form. We can manage the problem, but we cannot solve it. So you need to understand, we're never going to cut fatalities down. So we can't solve the problem. The problem is 0 fatalities, not that.
Yeah.
Manage the problem needs to be what's focused.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. That's just a different interpretation of solve. But you're absolutely correct. We are not going to be able to get all the fatalities to go away. That's unrealistic. It's not going to happen. But if the problem is the excessive number of horses dying now and the pressure that we're being faced from the public, if that's the problem, then we can go, let's say, a long way towards solving that problem by seriously reducing the numbers, and this technology will allow us to go on that. So we'll improve the situation. We can partially solve the problem of the public perception, but we can never solve the problem. Animals will break their legs.
One more question. Have you ever trained a horse?
I have, yeah.
You've trained horses?
Yeah.
Thoroughly. Racehorse?
Yeah, I've trained them. I've ridden in races.
No, you train horses. You train thoroughbreds
Yeah,
in the United States?
yeah, I have. Yeah, up in the Meadowlands and Lambert. Up at Penn National, I've run them up there for 5,000.
You understand?
I have a question sort of about the data that you use right now. Is this all collected in race day testing?
So let me repeat, there's people on Zoom that are having trouble hearing the question. So question is, the data that's being collected right now, is it only on race day? Because that'll zoom up a lot of what I
So, yeah, so this is, as I mentioned, this is 2 pronged. We have, one prong is to validate the race day breed or work day breeds to racing data. And then we have the racing piece. So all start at Churchill Downs, Ellis Park currently through the Churchill Downs spring meet, traditional states do next Sunday, have worn the sensor on the horse. And then there's we do have a select trainer who is doing all of his breezes are wearing the sensors as well. So we'll have a number of breezes. I'm not sure, Denise, you know how many breezes we're up to?
I don't, but let's say we did 30 this weekend, so we'll just multiply that by.
Yeah, probably, we're probably over a few hundred works.
But just as a, for instance, right now, horses that you've seen in the red flag on the race day, let's say just pointed the 7 that we pointed out that broke down and had negative readings coming out of the gate. Did you have any previous baseline?
Unfortunately, I wish we had, that'd be nice.
So the question was there any previous data? And that really does revert back to what I was saying in the beginning, that I think, the future of this can be a tool, but putting it on race day, I think at the end of the day, for me, was problematic just because of what's happening now. There's a bit of a skewed sense of what this is able to do. And until you have baseline data, which I'm not saying anything they disagree with, until you have true baseline data of what that horse is going to do, you know, what is, I'm sure who knows, somebody I worked with, you know, he really didn't go well behind, right? But what's his reading all the way through? That's where this tool will be beneficial to horsemen if it's kept within the confines of the horseman and their attending veterinarian. If that falls into, how is the StrideSAFE going to differentiate between a horse that clips heels, loses a shoe, steps on a rock? Right now, we can't answer that because we don't have that data that's leading up to the race. That will be hopefully in the future, but at this point, collecting data as in everything, it is necessary to progress and hopefully improve.
Okay, I need to modify it and argue with you a bit, if I may. So we have about 10,000 cases. There are not many medications that are brought out into the veterinary market that will ever be tested on 10,000 horses before they're released. So I would argue with you that we've got far more data than almost anything you have ever come across in the veterinary and in the horse world. And those 10,000 are in America, with 35,000 that we've got in Tasmania. So whereas I accept your premise, I prefer to modify it and say we're only going to get better.
Right, but
if I hadn't,
I guess I'm just trying to understand the data, how much we know from the data that you have already, how many horses say that you've seen, say multiple instances of showing a red flag in the gate, or have you had horses that one day they go out there and they're a red flag, they test or you put it on in the next race or the next work or whatever, and they're amber or green.
we do see that. I mean,
but in fairness, it's the comparison is what I'm talking about. You're just getting the data from one race. You have not had time to compare it to the 35,000 horses and grass. That's the point. You're wanting to get to that and have that collection.
Because our one horse is in fact validated against the 35,000. It's compared to kind of the lookalike type of situation. So fair enough, we don't have longitudinal data on that one, and Eric's right, it would be a lot better if we did. And our report that we send you will have every race that the horse has run. So you get one red or one green, whatever it is. The next time he runs, the report will have the previous race on, and the next time he runs, that one will be added. And so our report will cover 6 races going back into the past. So yeah, that's quite a long time, much further back than that. That was a whole nother day, and it's probably not as relevant. So we are accumulating that data. We do give that data to you, so that you can work out what to do. So that's the point is correct, but you're still left with the one critical thing. You saw that wasn't a one-off, actually, that slide. That one I showed you that everybody could see that was horrible, but that could have been a one-off. So what do you want to do? I keep quiet about that because it's just one-off and I haven't got him 10 times? Or do I say to you guys, hey, look, something really funny happened right there. I'm going to be a lot better in the future than I am now. I'll be a lot better if I had, 10 times as many races on this horse. There's so many ways in which I could be better. But please, just if you've got a little bit of time, would you mind just have a special look at that one? Because he could be sitting on a problem, and then an X-ray on his front leg would have shown a condylar fracture, and that horse would have been living. So I feel as a vet, I can't come out prematurely. I mustn't do that. But also, I've got to tell people if I think a horse is going to get hurt. So it might not be perfect. They might be going to get better tomorrow, but I've got to tell people and give them the chance to decide. If they say, well, we've only got it once, therefore I'm not listening, and fair enough, that's your call. Somebody else might say, well, he's only got it once, but yeah, I'll have a look. But I think as a vet and from our company, I've got to put it out there, and I think it is worthwhile, because we will definitely save horses if we give out just the one piece of information. So, that's where this is where the dances are danced, the terminology, the phrases we use, the understanding that we've got. We're all on the same page, right? We're all trying to save the bit. I want to do my bit. I'll modify what we do all we can. I'll fight tooth and nail for the horses and for my case. I'll back down if I'm wrong. I apologize to you all already for using the wrong words. I want to do that. I'm happy to do that because we're all facing the same problem and we've got to put this to bed as best we can and listen to one another.
Eric, might I follow up on your question because I'm not sure it's really an answer about if a horse stumbles out of the gate or if the jock, loses an iron, or if the horse throws a shoe or step on rock. I mean, could those, like, since you only have right now one race that you've got info on these horses, could that make it a red because they're not going to go the way they normally go?
Yeah. So the answer, the question was about circumstances that happen during a race, whether it's getting knocked, a shoe coming off, stumbling out of the gate, whether all those things could in fact trigger a red flag. And the answer to that is yes, it could. It could trigger a red flag. And in all likelihood, without giving information away about our research, in all likelihood, it's going to be part of the protocol. That's the first, and it's what we do at the present. The first job we do is look at the video. So horse has got a red flag, okay. Let's watch the video of the race. Let's watch it run. Is there anything we can see there that could have caused this? That we can immediately say, oh no, that's why this one happened. And then the next stage is talk to the trainer. Did you see anything happen? Was there anything? Oh yeah, he pulled the shoe off, or oh yeah, he did this, that, and the other. So between everybody, you work down that path to come to the best solution that we can. But we cannot be put off by the fact that it might misclassify a shoe coming off. It might misclassify a bump. We can't be put off by that. We have to accept it. We have to work through it, and we have to find as best we can the right answer to it.
What about jockey movement on a horse?
Yeah, that'll do it too. Not quite as much. A lot of the aggressive riding that won't do it. But if a jock suddenly stands up because he's in trouble or something and yanks him out to the side, that will set one off. We had one horse at Rillato that got a red flag because he blew the turn. We bore out around the turn, and when we went to look at him, they found there was a tooth broken and a tooth was sticking in his cheek. And so his mouth was sore, so the jock's trying to get him to come around that 5/8 turn, and that he did. So that caused that one. He was in no danger of dying. He cracked a tooth and it was sticking in his cheek. So these are all the things we have to deal with. Normal horse dealers, right? Normal horsemanship. We have to do that every time we see a horse run. We have to go back and work out. Was it relevant what we saw? Was it relevant what the jock said?
Are your investigators doing this before they contact the trainer and tell them you got a red flag?
Right. So yes, what we do as part of what we're doing to be thorough right now, we need to be on the same page as the trainer as best we can when we go to see them. We don't want to show up there and the trainer say, well, didn't you see? He fell down coming out of the gate and just got full look. So we don't want to be in that state of awareness. We want to do our due diligence first and look at the video. And Dr. McSweeney and I will talk about the race and talk about how the jockey's going. We'll address all those things, and then she'll go off to see the trainer fully armed in whatever knowledge she's got about the she'll have looked at where the horse is actually moving on the red flag. Is he getting off one leg? Is he going up and down? What's he doing? So she'll show up and give the trainer more detail about what caused the red flag. Again, to try and help you guys sort out what is going on. So these are all parts of the work we're doing to make this thing more and more and more used for you and more accurate and more practical. That's what it's all about. So yeah, yes, for all of that.
Of the red flag data that you have, do you get the data from pre-race warm-up? Are you getting red flag then? Or are you just getting it full speed data?
Yeah, but the question was,
let me say that because it's a good question. It actually hits a lot. The question is, where is the data coming from? And I'll say some people have actually asked, are you using it in the stretch? But basically the question is where, at what point during the race, if it's not the entire race, are you getting the data from?
Right.
Correct?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. So the warm-up data we don't use, it's too slow, it's too varied. They're on a pony, they're doing all these different things. You can't automate that. So that it's impractical to do that for large numbers of animals. It's indecipherable, so we don't do that. So our sensor, this little thing, has a satellite connection, and at post time, or 5 minutes before post time, it gets a signal from the satellite that's in the program that turns it on. So we get the rest. Now, the next problem is there's a lot of different things happening on a turn that are going on a race that could make a mess. So let's say you're a 2-turn race and you're going into the first turn and you got drawn 8 and you're a little bit slow to brake. You know, you're going to be back there 5, 6 somewhere. You're likely to be in trouble. You're having to make the turn. You know, meanwhile, somebody's hustling away on the rail. There's all sorts going on, right, as you go into that first turn. So that ended up being unreliable data for us to use as a screen. So we said we've got to look at places around the track where we can rely on the data. So the back end, the end of the backstretch, or going into if it's a sprint first turn, there's a spot there where they've all pretty well settled. You know, they know where they're going. They've got over the first bit. They're all sitting chilly, waiting to see what happens. They're all going about the same speed, you know, unless something's got tailed off. So there's a window there when you can start comparing apples to apples. So we look at that. And then we need turn data, because an important part of the system compares straight to turn. The average horse has more moving on the straight, and he gets tighter on the turn off his data, because he's got to lock in to get around that bend, and it makes the data tighter. So that's normally what happens. A horse that's not sound goes the other way. He's moving around, adjusting his stride on the backstrip, on the straight, okay, but he hits the turn and something bothers him and the data goes crazy. So the comparison between the straight and the turn is critical. So we find that moment about the end, the second quarter of the turn, just before they go into the middle of the turn, before they've all stopped going and whipping and driving. So we take that. Now, when we've got those two bits, and we've got a flag, then we can go back and look at all kinds of other things when we know there's trouble there. We'll go and look at them coming out of the gate, we'll look at them coming down the strip. We'll look at them all over the place, just depending upon where we think the problem was and what the nature of the problem is. Now, down the road, we can't keep this up, you know, for all the horses. So down the road, this is what we're going to teach your vets. They need to be able to sit there with this data, just like we would an X-ray, or just like we would an ultrasound, and read this stuff. They're going to have to be able to go through these strides and see where it happened, and see which leg it was that was causing the problem, and share that with you to better help you decide, was it a false rein, was it a jockey rein, was it the left front, is it the right hand, all these different things. The top vets are going to do that. The ones who are keen, they're already doing it, they're already looking at some of these things, and it's the only way that it can all get interpreted for you, the trainer.
Question, so you're saying now, my vets that I pay all this money to are jockeying these horses, and they're not smart enough to tell if they're off on the left front, right front, the rear, whatever, so all this money I'm paying them. I'm just questioning.
No, I'm not saying that.
Well, that's what you are saying. Yes, you are. You're saying about 40 years of experience. They come to jog hundreds and hundreds of horses
Yeah, very good.
all the time.
Very good. I
And
understand.
every time I look, I think it's something else, and they say it's something else, this man here's bad, I know it is. And you're insinuating that they can't jog a horse and say if they're off left or right, but your stuff can sit there and tell them that your grass is what's all left front. It's not.
I've obviously I've not been clear. May I try again in a slightly different way? So let's just leave, I'll hold that point and come back to it. But we've got one reality to face. Every single horse that has broken a leg and died on the track has been passed by this, at least the regulatory vets, and often the clinical vets, and often the trainer, and often the jockey. We've missed them all. That's a reality. I'm not talking about what you do day to day. I'm talking about this very unique group of animals that none of us can get.
But you're saying that your graphic can tell us that all these other people that's been in this business all these years, all this knowledge together, we don't know.
No, that's not.
What your graphic's gonna tell us to be, is going to break down.
Let me tell you, hang on, let me tell you the circumstances. Yeah, very good. If that would be ridiculous if that's what I was saying, and I'm not meaning to say that. So my apologies to you if that's how you've interpreted, and please allow me to do it again. Let me try again. So what I'm trying to say is that there are things happening only at high speed, and the horse is going 11 inches. There are things that happen then that don't happen anywhere else. So let's say he's on his left front leg, on his toe, and he's 1,200 pounds, 40 miles an hour on that leg. But when he does that, let's say that cannonball bends, that's how it works, right? But it only bends under that circumstance. If it's got some little lesion there, when he stands and bends it, it's gonna sting him, right? May I finish? But that horse, if the vet trots him up and down, no matter how good he is, if he trots him up and down on the blacktop, he's got no chance because their leg isn't bending. So those are the ones he's going to miss, and those are the ones my sense fine. Now, the vet can identify all these things. You trainers can identify all these things. There's lots and lots. We don't know any of that, but what we can do to you after an event, we can come back to you and say, look, we don't know your horse. We know nothing at all about your horse other than this. And it would appear to us that, and here we'll show you, that this sense is telling us the horse is moving off to the left for some reason. We don't know why he's doing it. We don't know anything about it. We might have had no previous data on him, so we don't know even if that's normal for him. But we do know he did it. We do know there's a possibility he could be at more risk. We're here to help you, share with you the information, give it to your vet so that they can interpret it in light of how the horse is behaving, and just do our little bit to try and help. That's all we're trying to do. We're not second guessing anybody. We're not criticizing anybody. We're doing none of those things. And if my explanation has implied that, I please retract that. I am not trying to.
I'd like to say something very basic to our entire profession and industry. There is nothing that we've ever had the ability to see or diagnose that hasn't potentially been made better by technology at some point. We have gone from, we had nothing but our hands and our eyes, to having X-ray, to having ultrasound, to having digital X-ray, to having MRI. And it's not a matter of saying, I've done cell work in my X-ray horses that are perfectly sound and had holes as big as your fist in the side, and we're going perfectly sound. Things of that nature that you see, do repository information on your limbs, things comes as a surprise. So he's not saying, I may not be that smart. He's not saying we can't see it. He's not, but there's things that you can find when you have a new technology that you can't find in the previous technology.
He's saying his statistics are smarter than you. That's what he's saying.
No,
That's what he's saying. But he's saying his game are smarter than you, Pelfrey, best all your life, all your years. But and there is nobody in here, there's nobody in here can look at a horse and say, I'm gonna break down my come out of that game. Bottom line.
Can I, would you be willing after this to meet with me, or I'll come to your barn, and then we can carry on the conversation so we don't distract from the flow?
Yeah, I think we need to.
I'm happy to come and see you.
We definitely need to move on. There's a handful of questions left. However, I think most of them, as I'm reading through, were addressed. There's two things that I want to be clear about. We talked about who is getting the information, but this was very specific. It says, how are you getting the contact information? Is it an email? Or are you coming to the barns to tell people? I mean, this just seemed a very specific question. How are people being contacted about the red flag?
So that Denise has email and phone numbers.
Email
to try to text, call, email, whatever, to try to get some type of communication.
Yeah.
Before just showing up at the bar.
Yeah, that was very specific in the how, so I wanted to make sure that got addressed. The other question that I thought was pretty interesting that wasn't addressed, I don't think at all. I think I know the answer to this, but it's the question being long really revolved around physical change versus mental change of the horse. You know, at this point, is it safe to say there's nothing in StrideSAFE that you feel is going to detect a horse that is just mentally off that day? It's more physical, or it is physical.
Honestly, I don't know, and there's no way I can tell what's the root cause of it.
Yeah.
My impression thus far is that there's nearly always been a physical answer when we've had the opportunity to go through. I don't think I can remember a horse where the case where it was a mental attitude, although I'm sure if a horse's mental disposition led to an erratic way of running, it didn't want to know, put his head up, didn't steer. I'm sure there's a chance that would set it off, but generally speaking, it's a mechanical event. I would think.
That one thing too, so, and this kind of goes back to what Dr. Hartman made, so much of what we rely on diagnostic wise for horse for soundness is done as slow speed. Jog, you see jogging on the racetrack, everything is done at slow speed. We really have no reliable information at high speed. The best jockey, the best trainer, the best veterinarian, the best set of eyes, when the foot is on the ground for 100th of a second during a stride. If they shorten that, if there's a slight change that alters that stride by half an inch, no one feels, sees it, or can be able to record that. And so this is our first opportunity, really, especially here in the United States, where we have some wearable type technology that can objectively record that information, and how we use that is what we're learning through. This is still the process of the protocols that the studies hopefully help us to develop. But, and that is no disrespect to trainers or veterinarians, but the reality is the human eye, the human brain cannot process that data fast enough. And when the jock comes back and says, yeah, he felt good, well, just because he said he felt good, that doesn't mean that everything is good. And it might, but this is the way to objectively guess data there. The goal is that it can help a trainer and their veterinarian work through an issue before it becomes a big issue, so that what could have led to a potential condylar fracture that had a screw placed in and you're gone for months, maybe it's 2 or 3 weeks of some rest. And yes, you still might not have that horse right then, but if you deal with it up front, that keeps the horse in the racing population for months on end, rather than having 2 or 3 races and then having to go screw in and then being set on a shelf. I think that's the intent.
Yeah, I think that's a great point.
Probably comparable to your dynamic scope or so, right?
Exactly.
Correct.
Exactly. That's a great point. The dynamics, once we started to be able to do a dynamic scope, guys would come back and say, when they can hear it, they don't know exactly what's causing it. We started doing the dynamic scope so we can learn a lot more information.
Tom, you got one last
Other questions, continual data points on individual horses. For horses, I know the electrical bars are good, at least maybe you ask this question better. What are the percentages that you have flag red when you come back and breeze for you? Is there, are you seeing it common, uncommon? Is it red flag from work or from race to breeze? Or
I don't know that we can answer that question.
well, that's what I'm saying. She doing a lot of testing contact, so I know she did bars at least somewhat
Yeah,
with the workers.
well, I think that we do have a different session for the race day versus group day, so just to check.
I measured down the stretch and workouts, I measured too.
Yeah, so the difference is, I mean, we have our algorithm where we're generating our green flag, amber flag, red flag. So whilst we will sit and actually manually look at the stride from the breathing data, it is a little bit different to breathing data. We have met horses that have applied to both their breeds and their race, and we've done follow-ups and pharmacologies. And as you know, as Dave mentioned, Dr. Lambert said, there's things that happen in races that were a race day situation. So I think, you know, again, the more we get, as part of what we're doing now is comparing the morning data to the evening data. So right now, I can't put a figure on it. That's going to be something that we'll have to do once we're finished. That is.
Are you seeing it commonly or not? Where it goes red and green or red?
Like I said, we don't put a flag in what we're doing breathing, but yeah, I mean,
Looking at their path.
looking at their patterns. I couldn't put a number on it right now, I can't put a number on it near breathing, right?
None of these trainers or vets, I think that's part of the thing we're trying to work towards, is where we can diagnose our horses before something happens, or if something's falling wrong, we say.
Exactly.
And because we are just a small number of people that we're doing this briefing for in the morning, of course, if we have something of concern, the briefing ones, they're typically getting worked up and not going to the race unless, you know, if they find something they're not.
That's what I wondered about previous race events.
Yeah.
Versus breezing them back.
Yeah, exactly. So typically, you know, if a breathing horse is concerned, we speak to the trainer and they'll go with that horse point of action. Yeah, sometimes they'll find something, you know, if we spoke about the feet on one horse, you know, saddle sores and horses, really some simple benign things that are not going to result in catastrophic injury. Then of course we have things that would have led to a race that could potentially broken down. So the stuff we found in the morning, communicate to the trainer, they follow up with them and they either find something or they don't. And some of those horses survive and had green races. I can't say between 2 9 have gone breeze ride and gone breeze ride after. Just because of trainers we're dealing with are quite on board.
I'm working, we get it about the other way, going from a race event to a breeze event, instead of a breeze event to. I think most trainers, if they had something flagged, they probably just go try to get it right before they.
So I'm going to throw another point in. Just it's very interesting watching that discussion and watching Dr. McSweeney answer that. When she first came down here 3-4 weeks ago, she'd never seen a sensor before and seen any of this data. So I hope you can all be really encouraged that this stuff can be seen, it can be picked up, it can be learned. You can get a long way in a short period of time if you put your mind to it and you work at it. So it might seem like a lot of unanswered questions at the moment, but you can see how quick people can learn. And if we can keep the R&D going and get new papers coming out and feeding it to vets, just like this veterinarian said, you know, it's just some more new technology, just like ultrasound. He and I can probably remember when ultrasound showed up. You know, back in the 1979, 80, you know, we'd never seen an ultrasound machine. And it's the same process.
Want to give our board a chance with
I
KHRC.
have 2 questions. The first is, if you are emailing and texting or calling trainers to alert them to a red finding, are you following up with them? And if so, how?
Yes, that is part of, so the study part, Dr. McSweeney is contacting them, reaches out to them, and then at that point, it's voluntary. The information, if a trainer wants to move forward, and wants to voluntarily get that information, it's the sensor is on all horses, but if they call and they're like, hey, I don't want to participate, then move on. That's not, there's no, it's not required, it's not forced, it's purely voluntary.
But you don't just send an email and then if you don't hear back, it's just. Make sure you make the contact with the person.
Yeah, so at the moment, all the red flags for the most part, I've notified them by phone call, just because this is so new to everybody. I don't want to, you know, freak anybody out and your worst got a red flag and not explain exactly what's going on. So most of the calls have been made to this point, have involved actually discussing what the sensors are, how we're using them and what this means. Yeah, so we're trying not to just let it out there and not get anything back. Of course, sometimes if I'm unable to make contact and I feel it necessary, I will send, you know, an email or a text and just give contact information for them to call me back. If they want.
So it's research, received.
Right. To the best of our ability.
You know,
I just
the,
quick interject, are they told then that they have the option of a free PET scan?
Yes, we discussed that. There's.
Well, diagnostic, it's not just,
Okay,
everybody
right,
says
right,
pre-testing, it's not just about the.
But they're told it's free.
Yes, there is, if advanced diagnostics are warranted, there is funding to offset that cost.
And then going forward, we can do that now because I have a good fortune to have Denise with us. But if going forward, this becomes more widely accepted and becomes a universal tool, the answer's got to lie with the veterinarians, because we can do this within the confines of this research. But with all the horses running all the time, we couldn't possibly do that. It's not our position to do that. We're not, that's not what we're doing. That's the veterinarian. We send them the information. And then if they want to call us, then they can. Or over time, if they can send them some teaching materials so that they can get up to speed quick. At the end of the day, it then becomes like all the other technology, training these vets, working out what to do. So it would then be automated out to that combination. And it wouldn't be a follow-up visit from the company because they couldn't do that. We just have to be there, available for phone calls if somebody wanted to on an occasional basis. That's down the road again.
I have one other thing. It's a question that was asked that I don't think was ever answered. And it still pertains to the person who would say the article that came out that I thought was fairly premature. If this is indeed a research study, that be premature to point out the horses that had a negative screen or whatever you want to say it broke down. That being said, in those same races, and I think the question was asked and unanswered, were there other horses in those races that were amber or red of some red nature that didn't break down?
Yes, so there are two things. I'll apologize a second time for the problems I seem to have caused with that announcement. And without being argumentative, I deliberately stayed away from the study. It was information that related to data that StrideSAFE had examined in the context of all the other data that we had and put it into the context of what's been published in the literature. So it was not to do with this. It wasn't premature. It was simply a statement of fact of how this data looked compared to the other sets, thousands of data sets that we have. But for somehow or other, I worded it wrong. It's caused a problem because I misspoke somehow. But I can assure you it was not to do with the study. It wasn't premature. It was statistically valid in the context of all the information that we already had. And I need to rein in my own enthusiasm sometimes. I feel for you all and the spot that you're in, and I wanted to keep throwing you some optimistic news because there isn't much. And so to me, it was very optimistic that we could see something in a horse that we could have seen earlier that fit with all the published literature for 25 years. It kind of validated our observation, and it validated my enthusiasm to all you trainers that there's a really good chance we're going to be able to help you. So that was all I was trying to do. And again, for anybody who took that the wrong way, my sincere apologies. It was not intended to do that. So I hope in this I've been able to clarify that a little bit.
But it still doesn't answer the question.
Yes.
In those same races,
Yes.
were there other horses that were flagged that pulled up and went back?
Yes, absolutely. And there are all the time. There are all the time horses that are flagged, right? That are in there. So
That's who, sorry, that's who Dr. Sweeney is following up with, these red flags that come up.
So we're running around 5% to 6% right now.
yeah,
That would get a red flag.
So this is racing and.
This is just the race. So like 5 to 6% of getting a red flag. We know that currently it's around 1.4 thousand starts suffer catastrophic injury. So in that 5%, we're not saying that they're all going to go out and break down, but for the most part, the ones that will have caught them in that 5% that we have. So that's what we're following.
the unique nature of this problem is that we're looking for a needle in a haystack, right? There's 1 in 1,000. It's a very, very small number. And so whenever you're trying to do something, find 1 in 1,000, and that's plagued with difficulty. How on earth to find 1 in 1,000? How do you find something that's unique just to that one animal? It's like almost impossible, and that's why we've had so much difficulty. But at least what this does, this test does, say, well, if that 1 in 1,000 is out there, it's going to be in this 5% in all likelihood. 80 or 90% of the time, it's going to be in this 5%. I'm sorry we can't do it any better than that right now. It means you're going to have to spin your wheels and a few false reds, but at least you've got a target to begin with. And there's a chance you'll find one. There's a chance you'll find 2. There's a chance we'll save your jockey from being paralyzed. It's worth it. For right now, it's not perfect. It's going to improve, but we've got no choice. We've got to do it because it's the only thing available to us right now, even though it's flawed.
Why aren't we doing more morning work, then I understand the afternoon and gathering the data, but the morning seems like the most opportune time to find something for horses actually in a race.
Correct. And so right now there's some big logistical, just purely scientific logistical, because race day, we know time, we know distance, we know who's doing it, 7 days in advance now with entries. So all of this information has to be programmed in so that when the sensor collects it, we know that it's attributed to a specific horse. How often training plans change the morning of, it looks like it's gonna rain, we're gonna bump this up. And so there are a lot of logistical things when it comes to training to be able that we can actually accurately collect the data in a timely fashion. You don't have 15 people running around and sensors out. So there's some logistics of just how to bring that. Oh, absolutely.
The time to catch.
Yes, it's the logistics of rain, the logistics of training are so much different than the logistics.
We've got a training center.
Yes, correct.
Well, again, I think we'll wrap it up. It's been 2 hours. Hopefully everybody's got at least a lot of questions answered and certainly find time to answer more questions. But the takeaway for me really is to make sure everybody understands the tool. It's a tool with technology going forward that I think could be beneficial. Again, when we look at press, when we look at the optics of what the rest of the industry sees, they see those statements being, oh, well, somebody knew that horse had a red flag and this is what happened. That's where the rub lies, is nobody knew that. The only horses that are going to be improved upon when it's being done just in a race is the horses that don't actually have a catastrophic failure, right? Those are the ones that we can now follow up on. So those statements of having, 7 of the 8 had a red flag get misconstrued by the rest of the public, look bad as if we knew that information going in. That's where I think a lot of our points have been, logistics aside, which is very understandable, having that baseline, I come back to that word, the baseline going forward, I think is going to be able to help trainers, attending veterinarians actually know if there's a problem. Now, if we're wearing it during the races and the horse comes back, then we have something for the attending vet to follow up on. But just making a statement that 7 of 8 had a red flag in the public, that then led everybody to believe that we knew what was going on, or we knew there was an unsound horse. That's when horsemen such as myself get very angry, because nobody sends a horse over thinking that it's some great thing.
Not trying to, when marksmanship scares us.
Yeah.
Is you're down the road is Tyson or Cage or Stephen, one day where you have that 600 horse and red flags and freezing goes on best list 3 days. Those are, you don't know the technology, right? That is purely 100%, and that's what scares us, is we're getting that point that if we don't know all the answers yet, maybe if there's false positives, false negatives, and then we're getting a mandate that this is where we're going forward.
You got to be careful.
It's a big question mark.
Yeah. But we have to have,
information on information.
yeah, I was gonna say, we have to get work on it. We have to
There's
get,
also pitfalls that they get scared.
yeah, and the reality is we have to get the information to get through the pitfalls. So that's where we are.
And hopefully from this study, there'll be more to spawn from it. But our goal is that, and we've had a lot of research interest for other things, other parts and pieces. Like Dr. McSweeney kind of came up almost last minute to do her follow-up where she is adding on the language locator to follow up where we do the StrideSAFE is red, and she's added on the language locator. That came up out of nowhere within like 30 days. But it was a great opportunity where we could kind of tag 2 things together where that was separate, but yet we can use some of that information still all within WSU, it's still part of the research program. But we could expand it a little bit more and try to utilize. And so I think those type of opportunities are going to continue to come up. There are pitfalls. We have to learn what those are. We have to learn how to react to them. We have to figure out how to avoid them going forward in the future. But the intent, wholehearted intent, the intent of this is that valuable, helpful information is ultimately getting back to a trainer and their veterinarian to make the best welfare choices for their horses as possible. So that ultimately, even if it's only race day, there are those red flags, the fact that someone could intervene off of that race is hopeful that that horse goes green and we averted another.
That's why the question is.
So, you know, while training is definitely the goal, is like the best, if we can do that, even racing helps because we're not going to catch them all, but we can certainly go down that path of being able to identify those before they get to that end, and to allow us to continually minimize that.
So does this continue at Ellis Park week proper after this week?
To be determined.
Oh, really? So it's not, oh, yeah.
Right now, this stops on Sunday. The end of the Churchill meet is when this stops. The KHRC program was set for the Churchill spring meet, and so that stops on Sunday. So it's, you know, it's, I'm open to opinions if people want to see it continue, and if people find it helpful, I certainly think there's an appetite to have those discussions, because we certainly want to support it if it is helpful. But at the same time, you know, conversations are being had. I can't comment either way.
Is there any significance in reads between when we were racing in Churchill and racing in Ellis, two different services? Is it giving any different kind of readings at all?
I think it would be very immature to say that at this time. I think it would be very tough. In fact, correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, to sit back and look at, right now we have defined goals of the study. There's so much other data that can be mined and used. That's going to be, we have the same work, so we have to start here, and they do have some data. All that data speak to that because they ran this at Naira for like 9 months, and so they have data on Belmont and data on Saratoga or Aqueduct, and so I'll let you speak to that part of it. But I think with regards to Churchill and Ellis, we're too close.
Yeah, that's a very fair point. Going back to the bigger population, that there wasn't consistency around the different tracks, Belmont, Aqueduct, Saratoga. You can see a very, very similar pattern. Our system was designed to accept that and not run any risk of flagging it. So then you'd have a lot more trouble to deal with. So it's all tied up in the model. And what we're able to do at the end of each racetrack is to calculate all the data for all the horses that ever ran on that track. And we have a fingerprint, as it were, for the track that we can use to help us interpret the data. So we can say, what do 3-year-old fillies, sprinters, what does their data generally look like? And what does, you know, mile 70 yards, 10,000 claimants, what do they look like? So we can, once we've got going and we've got the longitudinal record, again, it's very good for us to, we can start bringing that into the mix. And so that enables us to tighten up the definition of the facts even more. But when we start off, we're at our worst, we've only got the one chance. So that's all we can do. Then we get another one. Now we're twice as good because we've got 2. Now we've got a breeze. Now we've got 200 horses of the same type running on the same track. And as you start feeding all this in, you just get better and better and better. And that will just make the job for the horseman over time a lot more precise. But it'll be something you'll have with you. You'll have, like I said on the report, you get the last 6 races. So that I feel is going to be really helpful. You know how your horse has been doing. You can see on the sensor how he's been doing. And then the point is, what this test really is a post-race welfare test. Right? This isn't something to scratch. This isn't something to stop. This is a piece of information for you after the race. How did he come out of it compared to how has he been going before? Because we feel if we can give you this information, all other things aside, if we give you this information of how your horse is developing over time, you are better equipped to protect it. Right? We're not here trying to say it's that one, it's that one, it's that one. We're not here trying to say you're at fault. We're not doing any of that. There's a bit of that in the air just simply because it's so new and everybody's afraid and upset and nervous. But look down the road what it is. The race is run, you're walking back to your barn, ping on your phone, and you've got a welfare report on that horse just coming out of the race. Oh, good, he was agreeing. 85%, 80% are going to be green. So you can put your phone back in your pocket. Now you can talk to your owner. Now you're back to this one. Ping, this one came back as an amber. Oh, better just watch that one over the next few days. And you can do It's just like you've asked your jockey, how do you go? And they say, oh, yeah, it was great. You know, that's what you've got in the past. Now you've got 2,400 data points every second off your jockey compared to 100,000 other data sets like that. That's what you've got now. That's the technology improvement that Neil was alluding to. But that's what it's about, a post-race record for a report on how the horses come out of the race that you can plug into the way you normally do. You can bin it if you want, or you can plug it in if you want. That's entirely up to you. But that's what it's all about. It's none of this fear, none of this jumping through hoops, none of this scratching horses. It's all about post-race welfare assessment.
With that basic thinking, the direction of StrideSAFE, is it looking at a model where a veterinary practice or a trainer can buy a sensor and have the software and download it? Or is it more looking at going through racing commissions, regulatory racing authority, or whoever I said, and then monitor it? That would be my case. To me, the diagnostic ability of the vet is day-to-day with the horse. That should be our first line of defense. Rather than doing every horse breezing has one on it and then red flags we're putting on 30 vets or something like that. That's what I'm curious.
Here's where it's going. Right, look at me, how old am I? Right, I'm an old dude. I'm about at the end of my tether. Right, I've run my race and I've just been doing this to help. This isn't a business. This has been 4 or 5 years of slog. There's been 5 or 6 guys that worked for free for 4 years. Engineers and people all trying to help me as well, all trying to help. So where are we going with it? I want to pass it on. This is something for me to pass on to the industry. Where it gets plugged in, that's up to you guys to tell me where it gets plugged in. Sure, I'll have loads of ideas. One would be, I've got to get associated with the university. You've all talked about 10 or 12 different things that are research projects. Every time you hit one of them, it's thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. We need that. We need that. That's got to go on and get done. There's going to be all kinds of new discoveries. The trainers and everybody have to be got together and get that done. There's all the racetrack management side. There's so many things to this. I'm not going to be here to do it. I can't do it. I'm pretty well at the end of my run right now. I've taken it about as far as I can take it. It's been hugely expensive. Can't believe how difficult this was. You know, and no help, right? So it's been a little bit hard, but it's good. We're solid. We're in a good place. Come get it, you guys. Twist it and turn it any way you want. Throw it out if you want. You know, and that's entirely.
My question is there a business plan in place?
No.
Or there might be a place in
The
individuals or groups can buy sensors and software to.
the business plan is survive.
That's ours too. But we're all the same page about it.
So if it shows up, or we'd like to have a standalone. Well, yeah, I've got a prototype. We've worked with that already. We've had it assessed. It would be between $300,000 and $500,000 to put together a standalone system that could go straight up to the cloud, come back to the trainer in real time, give you the report. That's complicated. Like Will said, there's a lot of logistics to that. Put up 300,000 to 500,000, you'll have it by Christmas, just about. The bits are all there, but it needs happening. So is there a business plan? No, it's planned out. I'm already talking to universities about doing stuff. I'm already talking to people about teaching. How on earth are we going to get the vets all up to speed? That's a lot of work, a lot for the vets to do. But if it's going to fly, this is going to be a vet job, right? Because the vets are going to get to really look at the minutiae of this. They're going to start understanding how the whole horse works, how the back end springs work, how he gets ailments in the drive muscles of his back end. They're going to be all over that, how to handle that, how to work that out, how to keep the load off the front leg. You know, this is a whole new day coming up. Right, for you young guys, this is what's coming. So no, the business plan is just survive, lay it out in meetings like this. See if I get buried to death. I could just get totally buried. I don't know. Just lay it out, and then if it's right, and if it's in the right time, and if it's going to work, something will happen. You know, something good will happen. Somebody will step up. Somebody will award a grant like they did. Something will happen. But other than survive and try and do the next right thing, that's the plan.
Well, thank you both very much. We appreciate that. The good thing about it is, if we get questions via email, easy enough to get to you guys and get some additional information if necessary. So really appreciate all the interaction, appreciate the questions that were sent to us, the ones obviously on YouTube as well. So we thank everybody for their time. Important topic. Hopefully we've learned some stuff. Hopefully it'll be beneficial for the horse as we move forward. Thank you guys for coming.
Thank you all.